Hello. It's lovely to have the opportunity to speak with you. I'm going to tell you about ecocide. The word is relatively new. It was first used in 1970 to describe the damage created by Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. It was first used on the international stage by Olof Palme, Swedish Prime Minister, at the first UN Environment Conference in Stockholm in 1972. What do we mean by it? Ecocide comes from the Greek and the Latin. It means to kill one's home. And our home is our beautiful planet. We consider ecocide to be a root cause of the climate crisis and the ecological crisis that we're facing globally. So while climate change is a symptom, ecocide is a root cause. The discussion of criminalizing mass damage to nature has been ongoing for a number of decades in legal and political circles. In the 1990s, when the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court was being discussed in its draft form, there was a clause originally intended to be included there, which would have covered serious harm to nature. However, with the intervention of certain countries, including the US, the UK, the Netherlands, and France, who raised various objections, this clause never reached the final treaty in 1998. This means that when the International Criminal Court came into existence in 2002, it covered 3 crimes considered the crimes of most serious concern to humanity as a whole: genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. The term ecocide, therefore, was dormant for many years and was resurrected and brought into the public consciousness again by a UK pioneering lawyer by the name of Polly Higgins. She's no longer with us. She died on Easter Day in 2019. But I worked very closely with her for the last 4.5 years of her life. And she dedicated her final decade to promoting and moving forward this concept of criminalizing serious harm to nature at the international level. We founded the campaign that is now Stop Ecocide International together in 2017 to progress that work and to raise funds to support it. The movement, and it is now a global movement, has been gaining huge momentum in the last couple of years. And we would say that this is because of a number of things. There have been some key international reports that have come out in the last few years. For example, the IPCC's special report about 1.5 degrees, which came out in 2018 and was a big wake-up call to the political community. But also to grassroots mobilizations. And we mean such movements as Greta Thunberg's school strikes and Extinction Rebellion, the Sunrise Movement, Stop the Manganese in Africa, a number of grassroots movements worldwide, which have come to prominence in the last couple of years, opening up the conversation in the media to enable what we've been saying for many years to finally be heard. There are times in the evolution of law where a new crime can come into the consciousness of the global culture. And in the 1940s, this happened with genocide and crimes against humanity, following the atrocities of Hitler's regime in the Second World War. We believe that a similar moment is happening now. The global climate and ecological crisis is a challenge such as humanity has never previously faced. And criminalizing the most serious harm to nature and therefore addressing some of the root causes of this crisis feels to be absolutely a timely and important step to be taking. Our campaign is placed very interestingly in between the legal developments, political traction, and the public narrative around this movement. And it has recently passed a very key milestone. In June of this year, an independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide, convened by our foundation, launched into the world a legal definition of the term ecocide that could seriously be considered by states for potential proposal at the International Criminal Court so that ecocide could join genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, also the crime of aggression, at the level of the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole. There have been working definitions of ecocide in the past, including that penned by Polly Higgins and others by other groups of lawyers. However, what made this venture, this drafting proposal, this drafting project, I should say, a little different was that it was convened in response to political demand. Members of Parliament from Sweden approached our foundation last year and asked if we could potentially convene or commission a definition that could actually be considered for proposal by governments. And so this is the first time that a definition had been worked on in response to political appetite. And that enabled us to pull together some top talent from around the world. 12 international criminal lawyers and environmental lawyers of great renown in their own fields, chaired by renowned international barrister Philippe Sands QC and legal jurist from Senegal, Dior Falso. This group came from diverse backgrounds and positioning and diverse experience and long experience in different areas of law. And they worked to bring together a draft which was based strongly on previous legal precedent. And the key definition that they emerged with was very short and simple, and it is this. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. It seems very simple, and yet each word and phrase is strongly based on previous and established laws, while at the same time creating a new step, a step into a territory where damaging ecosystems and damaging nature purely per se is in itself a punishable offence. Who could be prosecuted by such a crime? Well, the International Criminal Court aims the crimes at individuals. So it's a question of targeting those key decision makers in a project which is likely to cause this serious harm. And that's very important because while there is environmental law in all around the world, in many forms, mostly regulatory, what we see is that environmental law is often badly enforced or leads simply to fines and what one might call a slap on the wrist. In other words, it's not taken terribly seriously as a body of law. And large corporations, which are often those who are the most common offenders in serious environmental crimes, simply adjust their budgets to deal with adjustments in regulation, creating instead a crime of ecocide where an individual, a key decision maker, can be held personally liable, criminally responsible for acts that lead to serious harm, could create a very different atmosphere in which the corporate world could operate. If you are potentially likely to lose your personal freedom because of a decision that you're making and the impact it could have on the environment, you're going to think very carefully before making those decisions. And that is a large part of what criminalizing serious harm to nature could do. It can act as an enforceable deterrent. It's important as well that our foundation and our campaign aims specifically at the International Criminal Court. And that is in part because the ICC is the only global mechanism which directly accesses the criminal justice systems of all its member states. In other words, if you make something a crime at the International Criminal Court, then any ratifying state must incorporate it in its own domestic legislation, creating a breadth of possibilities for where perpetrators can be prosecuted. But also, there are other elements to approaching this at the international level. One of these is that it will take time. We trust not too much time. We're aware that this decade is absolutely decisive in turning the planetary ship around and away from climate damaging and ecosystem destroying practices. But it does take some time, because it means gathering the support and garnering the support of many states in order to move it forward. Because to add this crime, we need 2/3 of members of the International Criminal Court to be behind it. And that creates a time period and a gathering of momentum, which is very important. Because while we believe that when this law is in place, prosecutions may take place, for example, those who make decisions leading to serious, for example, toxic waste dumping incidents, or large deforestation projects, or potentially industrial accidents that could have been avoided by following the proper safety protocols. While all of those things become possible, it is actually before the law comes into place that the impacts and the developments that it will inspire will become visible. And that is because at present, there is no hard stop parameter that can truly encourage corporate investors, policymakers, and so forth to think carefully about the direction in which they go and the practices which they use. When a law like this is visible, coming over the horizon, and is going to be in place at a certain point in the near future, this can perhaps provide an interesting incentive or a kind of parameter that allows people to think in new ways. We don't, for example, go to a government and ask for a permit to kill a few hundred people for our new business. That would be a nonsense. It's criminally illegal, but also it's a complete taboo. We would like to make sure that damage, serious damage and harm to nature begins to be considered in the same way. I did an interview recently for a financial podcast, and I was asked, how could corporations stay just on the right side of this law? My response was this: you don't try to say, stay just on the right side of killing a few hundred people. You avoid it completely. You don't go in that direction at all. And that is the kind of thinking, the kind of changing consciousness that we anticipate this crime could create. So while we believe that there is no single silver bullet that can deal with all our environmental problems around the world, what we do believe is that there is a necessary and essential strategic intervention that can be carried out by putting this crime in place. Because without it, it's very difficult to see how all of those emissions reductions targets, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and all of the worthy initiatives that have been begun worldwide can move towards their best conclusion. Because what we're seeing is that goodwill agreements are simply not enough. We also believe strongly that criminalizing serious harm to nature can have effects also in the arenas of social and racial justice, climate justice generally, because it is those who have created the least parts of these problems, those who have not created huge emissions, who have not engaged in polluting industries. These are often the countries that are feeling the effects of climate change and of ecocide most strongly. For example, the states who are leading in this conversation internationally are small Pacific Island, Vanuatu, for example, the Maldives. These were the first countries to call for ecocide to be made an international crime. They are already suffering the sharp end of the effects of climate change. They are looking at rising sea levels, which are gradually destroying their land. And it's often the case that those countries suffering from these things were not at the cause. The decisions are made in the wealthy north. And it is those decision makers that international crimes can potentially target. And so it is for those decision makers that the approach of this law will be most important. We also, as I said, find ourselves dealing directly with the political traction and with the public narrative. And what we know is that when we talk to the general public, to ordinary citizens, the response is almost always, of course, ecocide should be a crime. In fact, many people either believe it was already and are surprised that it is not, or they just feel that it brings together for them this sense that there is damage happening to nature in so many different areas. And this word can somehow bring all of that together as serious harm to nature. And once we understand the word ecocide, we also understand that it's bad and wrong and needs to be stopped. And so there is an internal momentum to this conversation that everyone can contribute to, and that we believe is a conversation for everyone in every sector. Because we also believe that the biggest untapped resource for addressing this crisis that we are addressing as a world, as a globe entirely, is the resource of human imagination and intention. Everything on this planet that hasn't grown out of the ground is here because of human intention. And everybody listening to this, no matter the sector that they work in, their particular walk of life, their particular interests, what they spend their time doing, every single person can think about how would the world be with this new rule in place? How would it be if we were to actually acknowledge the interaction and the interdependence of human life and human civilization with the natural world? And that is a cultural shift that we believe criminalizing ecocide has the potential to assist. If you work in infrastructure projects, how would those change? How would the safety rules that you apply change if this law were to come into place? If you work in the fashion industry, how would that affect what you do? How would you approach different ways of producing materials, different approaches to the treatment of the creation of garments, different approaches to how those things are sold, different approaches to how we think about them so that we don't just throw them away? Those are just a couple of examples, but we know that inside the imaginations and the hearts and minds of everybody on the planet, there are ways of doing things which are different and which we are already capable of. So many of the solutions that we need to transition to a thriving world are already in existence. They're simply not being supported, subsidized, policies made for them. With this new rule in place, all of that could begin to happen even before the law comes into effect. We'd hugely encourage you to visit stopecocide.earth, our website, and have a look at the actions that you could potentially take immediately to support this movement. But more than that, we believe that the global conversation is what will make the biggest difference. Because the more people are talking about ecocide, the more that word and that concept enter the political discussion. And we know from our own experience that this is true in those countries where ecocide is being discussed in that language, in that culture. It is often the politicians from those governments who then approach us and ask us, what is this phenomenon of ecocide? What is this law you are talking about? And that is how the conversation grows. We very much hope you will join us in this. And we hope that you will find out more about our movement at our website and by looking at many of the articles that are currently coming out in the media about ecocide. This is a law that is on its way, and it could transform everything. Thank you so much for listening.